What would you do if the person who healed your child's broken heart was the last person on earth you were supposed to fall for? Savannah Cross has one rule. 1. She built it from the rubble of her own shattered trust, and she has kept it like a sacred vow for 7 years. No man gets close to her son. No man earns that privilege. Not after what happened. Not after what she learned about how love can look like safety right up until the moment it destroys you. Woo Young Song has a different rule. He built his from something older, something carved into him long before he had the language to name it. Never let them see you bleed. Show nothing. Need no one. A man who feels too much is a man who can be used. His father taught him that. The boardrooms of Manhattan confirmed it. And so he became exactly what the world expected. Impenetrable, brilliant, cold. These two people should have stayed strangers. Employer and employee. Two ships anchored in the same harbor, but pointed in opposite directions. Then a 7-year-old boy asked a question that changed everything. This is the story of what happens when the strongest walls meet the softest kind of love. The kind that doesn't knock. The kind that simply sits down beside you and waits. If this story finds your heart, subscribe and leave a comment below. Your words keep these stories alive. It was a Tuesday in October when Savannah Cross first understood that her life was about to become something she had no map for. She had been working in the Song penthouse for 4 months by then. 4 months of marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Manhattan like a dare. 4 months of learning which surfaces could be touched and which were purely decorative, which rooms were used and which were preserved like museum exhibits. 4 months of learning the rhythms of a man she rarely saw, because Woo Young Song left before she arrived and returned after she left. Their world overlapped only in the evidence. A coffee cup placed with geometric precision at the edge of the kitchen island, a jacket folded over the back of a chair with a neatness that felt almost aggressive. She knew what he looked like from a distance. That was all. The kind of knowledge you gather sideways, from photographs on walls and the impression a person leaves in a room after they've gone. That October morning, Savannah came in at 7, earlier than usual. Her son Eli had a school program that afternoon, and she'd agreed to cover another cleaner's morning shift in exchange for leaving by 2. She had her keys, her cart, her earbuds, and she had Eli, because it was a teacher development day, and there was no school, and no aftercare, and no other option. Eli Cross was 7 years old. He had his mother's stubbornness and a laugh that sounded like it was always surprised by itself. He was the kind of child who asked questions with the confidence of someone who expected the universe to answer. He followed Savannah into service buildings the way other children followed their parents into grocery stores. Curious, observant, already composing opinions. Savannah told him the rules before they entered the elevator. No touching, no running, no talking to anyone they passed in the hallway. Stay close. He agreed to all of it with the solemnity of a small diplomat and the attention span of exactly 0. She was in the primary suite, changing pillowcases, when she realized Eli was no longer in the doorway where she'd told him to wait. The particular quality of silence that replaces a 7-year-old's presence is unlike any other silence. It has weight. It has the specific shape of imminent disaster. She found him at the end of the hall, standing at the threshold of a room she had never entered. It was marked on her orientation map as a home gym, and she had been instructed to clean it only on Fridays, when Mr. Song was confirmed to be in the Seoul office. This was a Tuesday. Savannah reached the doorway and stopped. Woo Young Song was in the center of the room. He was moving through a sequence she would later learn was a form of Korean martial art, something between meditation and combat. Every motion connected to the one before it, with an intention that made the air around him feel structured. He wasn't performing. He wasn't aware of being watched. He was inside something private, something necessary, something that existed in the space where most people would simply call a feeling. The room was silent, except for his breath and the soft percussion of his feet on the mat. Morning light pressed through the east-facing glass and moved with him. Savannah couldn't move. It wasn't that he was beautiful, though the cold part of her brain registered that he was. It was the quality of it. This man, who she had understood to be all surface and control, was somehow entirely unguarded. Whatever armor he put on before the world saw him, he had left it somewhere else this morning. What she was watching was not a performance. It was a person being exactly what they were, in a room they believed was empty. She became aware, distantly, that her son had stopped breathing beside her. Then Eli said, at full volume, with the absolute confidence of someone who has never been taught to be afraid of the wrong moments, "Wow. Can you teach me that?" Woo Young stopped. The silence that followed had edges. He turned. He saw the boy first, then Savannah, who was approximately 2 seconds from collecting her son, her cart, her keys, her dignity, and whatever career she had left, and leaving the building at speed. She started with the apology before he could speak. She was sorry, she said. Her son was not supposed to be here. She'd come in early to cover a shift. She completely understood if this was grounds for a conversation with her supervisor. It would never happen again. She was so... "What's your name?" The question was quiet. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Eli. Eli, who had not been told to be afraid of this moment. "Eli, what's yours?" Something shifted in the man's face. It was small. If Savannah had not been standing close enough to see it, she would have missed it entirely. It was the kind of thing a person's face does when it remembers something it has been trying to forget. Woo Young. "Do you know Taekwondo?" "My friend Marcus says Taekwondo is the best, but my teacher says all martial arts are good if you do them right." Woo Young looked at Eli for a long moment. "Your teacher is correct. So can you teach me?" Savannah put her hand on her son's shoulder. "Eli, we do not ask people that." Woo Young's gaze moved to her then, and she felt it the way you feel a change in barometric pressure, not loudly, but through the body, before the brain has had time to interpret it. "Saturday morning, 7 o'clock. Bring appropriate shoes." He walked out of the room. Savannah stood in the doorway of the gym for what felt like a very long time after he left. Her son was already bouncing on his heels. She was doing the thing she always did when something happened that she hadn't prepared for, counting it, measuring it, looking for the angle, for the cost, for what it would eventually require of her. She was 28 years old. She had learned, the hard way, that when something felt like a gift, you checked it twice. She almost didn't bring him. She spent Friday night constructing reasons. It was inappropriate. The professional line existed for a reason. Eli would get attached. Eli always got attached. It was his most wonderful and most dangerous quality. The way he loved things and people before he'd had time to audit whether they deserved it. She would end up having to explain to a 7-year-old why something good had been taken away, and she had made herself a promise, the morning she left Eli's father, that she would never again be the instrument of her son's disappointment. It was Eli who made the decision. He appeared at her bedroom door at 6:15 on Saturday morning, already dressed, shoes in hand, with the expression of someone who has been awake for considerably longer than was reasonable. "You were going to be late." She went. What she expected, a cordial 30 minutes, an exercise in rich person noblesse oblige, something that would be done by 8 and forgotten by 9. What happened? Woo Young Song arrived in that gym at exactly 7 o'clock and spent 90 minutes teaching her son how to stand. Not how to fight. Not how to kick or block or any of the things Eli had romanticized from YouTube videos. How to stand. How to feel the floor under your feet. How to breathe from a place low enough in your body that it didn't cost you anything to be calm. Eli, who could not sit still for 7 consecutive minutes under normal circumstances, was completely quiet. Savannah watched from the doorway with her arms crossed over her chest, because it was the position that felt like the most structural, and she needed structure right now. What she was watching was doing something to her that she did not have language for and did not want to name. She had never seen a man be patient with her son in that particular way. Not performing patience, not enduring him. Being genuinely, completely present with a 7-year-old who asked too many questions and kept forgetting which foot went first. Woo Young corrected him the same way each time. Same tone, same calm, no irritation. When Eli finally got a sequence right, the acknowledgement was simple and immediate. Good. Just that. But the way it landed made Eli stand 2 inches taller. Savannah understood something then, standing in that doorway. She understood that this man had been taught, trained, really, to be strong in a way that left no room for anything else. She recognized it because she'd been trained in something similar, though the teacher had been grief instead of tradition. And she recognized the thing it cost. The way that kind of strength hollows a space inside you that you can't name, because you've never been given the vocabulary. She did not let this recognition become anything. She folded it and put it somewhere back behind her sternum and went back to not feeling it. The sessions continued, every Saturday, 7 o'clock. She told herself it was because Eli asked, and she didn't know how to refuse him, which was partly true. She told herself it was a temporary arrangement, which was less true every week. She and Woo Young developed a careful choreography of non-interaction. She brought Eli, stayed in the doorway or the adjacent hallway, and left when he left. They exchanged approximately 14 words per session. She was scrupulously professional. He was scrupulously nothing, which was its own kind of communication. Except for the morning she arrived to find that he had placed a chair in the hallway outside the gym. Just a chair. No note, no explanation. The kind of gesture that could have been coincidence if she'd wanted it to be. She sat in it. She didn't say thank you. He didn't reference it. They both pretended it hadn't meant anything and both of them were lying. Except for the afternoon, a Thursday, not a Saturday, nothing to do with Eli, when she was cleaning the kitchen and he came home earlier than usual. He stood in the doorway in the particular way a person stands when they are trying to decide whether to say something. She kept her eyes on the counter. He got a glass of water. Then, without looking at her, "You're good at this." She thought he meant the cleaning. She thanked him. At being everywhere without being seen. It's a skill. He walked out. She stood at the counter for a long time after, trying to determine whether that had been a compliment. She decided it was. She was not sure why that mattered to her. She spent several days being not sure why it mattered, which was its own kind of answer. In November, 6 weeks after the sessions began, Eli came home from school with his jacket ripped at the collar and a story he was clearly rehearsing on the way up. Savannah knew before he spoke. She knew the way mothers know things, not because they are magical, but because they have memorized every variation of their child's silence, and this particular variation had been sitting in her stomach since she picked him up. His name was Dylan. He was 9. He had decided that the way Eli talked was funny, and that his shoes were wrong, and that his lunch was weird, and he had been communicating these assessments with the consistency of someone who enjoyed the work. Eli told her this very carefully, watching her face the way he always watched her face when he was trying to determine how much she was going to worry. He was 7 years old and already managing her feelings. She made a note of that pain and filed it. "Does Mr. Woo Young know about stuff like this?" A pause. "Do you think I could ask him? Not about fighting, just about, like, how to not let it matter." She told him she'd think about it. What she actually did was lie awake at 1 a.m. processing the fact that her 7-year-old had instinctively turned toward this man for a kind of guidance she hadn't realized he was hungry for. It told her something she didn't entirely want to know, about what Eli was missing, about what she had been unable to provide alone, about the shape of the absence she had never found a way to fill. She told herself it was natural. Boys needed models, It didn't have to mean anything about her. It didn't have to mean anything about him. Saturday came. She didn't plan it. She told herself she was just going to see if the moment arose naturally for Eli to bring it up himself. She was going to be very casual about it. She was not casual about it. She stood in the hallway on her chair until the session was 20 minutes from ending, and then she knocked on the frame of the open gym door. Can I say something? Woo Young looked at her with an expression that was very careful and very still. She told him about Dylan. She kept it brief. She watched his face while she talked and saw nothing move on the surface of it, which she'd learned by now was not the same as nothing moving underneath. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Eli. Come sit. They sat on the mat, Eli cross-legged, Woo Young with his legs folded beneath him, the way he always sat when he wasn't moving. Savannah stayed in the doorway. Something told her she wasn't supposed to leave. There will always be someone like that, Woo Young said. Someone who makes noise to cover the fact that they are afraid. It doesn't stop when you grow up. The noise just changes shape. Eli processed this. Were you scared of people like that? I was taught not to be scared of anything, which is a different problem. What do you mean? A pause, long enough to be deliberate. If you are never allowed to be afraid, then you also can't feel other things clearly. Everything becomes flat. You become very good at the outside, less sure about the inside. Eli turned this over. That sounds lonely. Woo Young didn't answer. He looked at the mat between them with the expression of a man who has just been handed a truth by a 7-year-old and doesn't have anywhere to put it. So what do I do about Dylan? You stand the way I taught you, not because it will change him, but because it will remind you of what you're made of, when you've forgotten. Savannah walked back to her chair in the hallway and sat down and stared at the wall for a long time. She pressed both hands flat against her thighs. She had a rule. She had kept the rule for 7 years. She told herself she was still keeping it. The past has a timing problem. It never arrives when you've prepared for it. It waits for the precise moment when you've let yourself breathe. His name was Marcus Devereaux. He was Eli's biological father. He had been 31 when Savannah was 20, and he had been the most certain she had ever felt about anything. And then he had been the most wrong she had ever been. He had left when Eli was 3 weeks old. Not dramatically. That would have been something she could hold on to. He had simply become someone who wasn't there, absent the way certain kinds of weather are absent, so gradually you can't name the exact moment the sky changed. She had not heard from him since Eli was 2. She had rebuilt her life around that silence the way you rebuild around a wall. You don't question it. You just work with it. You plant things near it. You learn where the shade falls. The call came on a Wednesday in December. She was at the penthouse. She saw the number and stood very still in the middle of the kitchen for 3 seconds before she answered. Marcus Devereaux wanted to be in his son's life. He had language for it. He'd done work, he said. He understood what he'd done. He wasn't asking for anything dramatic. Just a chance. Just a conversation. He had a right, not a threat, just a fact. He had a right. She ended the call before she said something she couldn't take back. She put the phone in her apron pocket. She finished the kitchen. She cleaned 2 bathrooms. She remade both guest beds with the methodical precision of someone trying to put their hands somewhere useful, so their mind doesn't come apart. She thought she had been very controlled about it. She thought she had managed. Woo Young came home at 5:30 and found her in the laundry room with a pillowcase she had been folding and refolding for approximately 11 minutes. He stood in the doorway. He said nothing. He was very good at standing in doorways and saying nothing, she'd noticed. The difference this time was that his silence felt like a question. I'm fine. You've folded that 3 times. He didn't move from the doorway. She put the pillowcase down. She looked at the wall. She was not going to do this. She was absolutely not going to do this. She told him about the call. Not all of it. The shape of it, the man, the absence, the sudden reappearance, the specific cruelty of, "I have a right." Woo Young listened the way he did everything, without moving, without interrupting, without performing concern, just receiving it. When she finished, he was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not respond at all. Then, "What does Eli know about him?" "That he exists, that he wasn't ready. I've never lied to him. I kept it small, age appropriate." "And what do you want?" She blinked. Nobody asked her that. People asked what was fair, what was legal, what was best for Eli. Nobody ever led with what she wanted. "I want him to not exist, which is not an option. So..." Something almost moved across his face. "You protect people by yourself. You've done it so long you think it's the only way." She met his eyes then. She had been careful not to, for months. Up close, his were the kind that seemed to be looking at something inside a thing rather than the surface of it. "Isn't it?" He didn't answer. He walked to the kitchen. He came back 10 minutes later with 2 cups of tea, not coffee, tea, somehow he'd known, and placed one on the shelf beside her. Then he went back to whatever the rest of his evening was. She drank the tea. She stood in the laundry room for a while longer. She was keeping her rule, she told herself. She was absolutely still keeping her rule. The rule, however, had begun to feel like something she was carrying on her back instead of something holding her up. Marcus Devereaux did not wait for her answer. She learned this on a Thursday afternoon when she picked Eli up from school, and her son told her, with extreme casualness, that a man had come to the school that day. That the man had said he was his father. That the front office had sent the man away. Protocol. She had Eli's emergency contacts, and this man was not one of them, but that Eli had seen him through the glass of the office door. Savannah drove home at a speed that was technically within legal limits and emotionally somewhere else entirely. Eli's voice came from the back seat, careful, measuring. "Is he my dad?" "Yes." "Why did he come to school?" "I don't know, baby." A beat. Then, "Are you scared?" She kept her eyes on the road. "I'm being careful. There's a difference." Eli sat with that for a moment. "Okay." And then, quieter, "Can I tell Mr. Woo Young?" She said yes, before she had time to analyze why. Something in her had decided, without consulting the part of her that maintained the rule, that yes was the right answer. The next Saturday, while Savannah sat in the hallway with her hands folded in her lap, Eli told Woo Young about his father. He told it the way children tell things, in the order they happened to him, which is not always the order they occurred, skipping what felt unimportant and landing hard on what felt large. "A man came to my school. He said he was my dad. I didn't get to talk to him. My mom looks like she looks when she's trying not to worry. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel." Woo Young listened without moving. "What do you feel?" Eli thought about it with the seriousness he brought to questions that mattered. "Confused and kind of like something got moved in my room, but I don't know what." That's an honest answer. Most people aren't that honest about confusion. They cover it with something else. Like what? Anger. Or pretending they're fine. A pause. "Do you do that?" Woo Young was quiet for long enough that Savannah, in the hallway, held her breath. "I used to. I'm learning not to." She pressed her hand to her mouth. She was not keeping the rule anymore. She understood this in the way you understand a thing when you've known it for a while, but finally stopped arguing with it. The rule had been designed to protect her from the specific vulnerability of letting a man matter to her life. The rule had not anticipated a man who talked to her son the way this man talked to her son. The rule had not been built for this, which meant she was going to have to make a choice from a different place, with a different set of tools, in territory she hadn't prepared for, She was terrified. She was also quietly something else. Something she didn't name yet because naming it felt like setting it in motion, and she wasn't ready for what came after. January came in cold and unforgiving, the way Manhattan Januaries do, and with it came a shift in the household's atmosphere that Savannah couldn't quite locate. Woo Young was home more. She told herself this was coincidence, a slower quarter, maybe, or the nature of year-end financial cycles she knew nothing about. But the evidence accumulated the way quiet evidence does, in small things. The coffee cup appeared later in the morning. She heard calls ending as she passed certain rooms. Once, she found him at the kitchen table with his laptop and a look on his face she'd never seen. Not distracted, but somewhere private inside himself. The way people look when they're reckoning with something and haven't decided what to do with it yet. He looked up when she came in. He closed the laptop. "I can come back." "No. Stay." He said it without drama. The way you say a thing when you mean it simply. She stayed. She cleaned. The room held both of them in it, and something about that felt, to her, enormous inconvenience, like exactly the right amount of space. It was the end of January when she found him. It was a Friday evening, later than she'd normally be there. She'd lost track of time finishing a task she hadn't been able to complete midweek, and she was cutting through the hallway toward the service elevator when she saw light under the closed gym door. She stopped. She told herself to keep walking. The professional thing, the correct thing, the smart thing was to keep walking. She did not keep walking. She pushed the door open just enough to see. He was sitting on the mat with his back against the far wall, and his arms on his knees, and his face. His face was not the face she knew. The controlled, architectural face that she'd catalogued over months was gone. What was in its place was something unfinished and very old. He was not crying, exactly, but she understood instinctively that he had been, or was about to be, or was doing the thing you do when you've decided not to, but your body hasn't gotten the message. She stood in the gap of the door. He hadn't heard her. She could leave. She could give him the mercy of not knowing he'd been seen. But something happened in her chest. Something she'd been holding very carefully for months suddenly shifted its weight, and she pushed the door open the rest of the way and walked in. He looked up. His face went through 3 things in about 2 seconds. Surprise, the automatic reach for control, and then something that looked like, not relief, exactly, recognition. The thing a person's face does when someone has arrived in a room they didn't know they needed company in. She crossed the room and sat down on the mat. Not close enough to crowd him, just within the same space, which felt like everything. "You don't have to tell me." She meant it. She would have stayed either way. He looked at the mat for a long time. Then he began. "My brother died 14 years ago. He was 22. A pause that had weight in it. He was, not like me. He felt everything out loud. My family saw it as weakness. I was supposed to be the model, the one who showed him how to be harder." His voice didn't break. It just thinned at the edges. "I wasn't there when it happened. I was in Seoul, at a meeting my father told me was more important than flying home for a weekend." The silence in the room was the kind you could breathe. I hadn't cried about it. Not once. Not in 14 years. Because crying was the thing I had decided I wasn't allowed to do, and I had gotten so good at not doing it that eventually I forgot it was even possible. For me. What changed tonight? Her voice was low. He looked at her. Really looked at her. "Your son told me I sounded lonely. He said it 2 months ago, and I have been unable to put it down." Savannah Cross sat on that mat in the last hour of January and looked at a man who had just handed her the most private thing he owned. She thought about her rule. She thought about what it had cost her, holding it. She thought about the tea he'd placed beside her in the laundry room without a word, the chair in the hallway, the way he said, "Good one" to her son, and made him stand taller. She reached out and put her hand over his, just her hand on top of his. That was all. He turned his hand over. They sat like that for a long time in the gym in January, and outside the window Manhattan kept happening the way Manhattan does, indifferent and enormous, and inside that room, two people who had both spent years being harder than they needed to be sat in the same space and let it mean something. February arrived, and Savannah Cross did what she always did when she was in danger of being happy. She created reasons to be careful. She cataloged the complications the way you catalog inventory before a storm. She was his employee. He was her employer. The power differential was not a small thing. She had lived long enough in hard circumstances to know exactly how the story went when a woman in her position started believing that the man at the top of the building saw her as a person and not a convenience. She had watched that story happen to other women. She had promised herself she would never be in it. She told herself the gym had been a moment, and moments were not promises. She did not go back to the gym on Fridays. She recalibrated her schedule. She was professional. She was pleasant. She was exactly what the job description asked her to be. Woo Young said nothing about this for 3 weeks. On the third Saturday of February, the session ended and Eli ran ahead to get his bag, and Woo Young stopped at the doorway where Savannah was already collecting her jacket, already preparing the exit. "You're doing it again." She looked up. "Doing what?" "Being everywhere without being seen." A beat. "Except now it's from me." She met his eyes. She told the truth because she was tired, and because the truth was faster. "I don't know how to be in this situation without someone getting hurt." "Which someone?" "Any of us." He was quiet for a moment. "I understand that. I have spent most of my life engineering situations where no one could get hurt, including me. I am very skilled at it." A pause. The kind where she could see him choosing the next word carefully, the way he did when something cost him. "I am also very tired of it." "I'm not asking you to stop being careful," he continued. "I'm asking you to let me—" Another pause, shorter. "Be in the same room as the careful, without you having to disappear." Eli reappeared with his bag and his shoes and the leftover momentum of a 7-year-old who'd spent an hour doing things that required intensity and now needed to discharge it into the universe. "Are we getting bagels?" Woo Young looked at Savannah. Savannah looked at Woo Young. "Are we?" he asked. She took a breath. "Yeah. We're getting bagels!" March moved through the city like a season rehearsing for itself. Not quite winter, not quite spring, the air unable to decide. Savannah decided, not dramatically, not in a single moment. Healing never happens in single moments, despite what movies suggest. It happens the way light changes in a room over the course of a day, so gradually that you can't name the turning point. Only look back from the evening and realize that somewhere between morning and now, everything got brighter. She let him in. By increments. With the careful, calibrated trust of someone who has been burned before, and carries the knowledge of it in her body, not as a wound anymore, but as a kind of wisdom. She stopped performing professionalism as a wall and started letting it just be what it was, care and respect, offered freely, returned in kind. He was not a perfect man. She was not looking for one. He was sometimes too quiet in ways that made her work to reach him. He defaulted to function when feeling was required, and she had to learn the language of his actions because his words came slower than most people's. There was still something in him that flinched when tenderness arrived unexpectedly, a reflex from childhood, not cruelty, just the residue of being trained toward hardness. She found she didn't mind the work of learning him. That felt, in itself, like information. Like the kind of thing you notice when love is real versus when it is convenient. And Eli was already there. Had been there, she suspected, since that first Saturday morning, the way children arrive at things before adults have finished arguing about them. He and Woo Young had their own vocabulary by now, an economy of gestures and shorthand, and the particular ease of two people who have sat in the same silence enough times that it doesn't require filling. One afternoon, she came into the kitchen and found them at the island. Eli was doing homework. Woo Young was reading something on his tablet. Neither of them was speaking. The quiet between them had the quality of something comfortable, something that had been arrived at over time. It was the most ordinary scene she'd witnessed in that apartment in all the months she'd worked there. It undid her completely. She stood in the doorway and did not cry, which required considerable effort. She understood what she was looking at. She understood what Eli had needed, for years, that she had not known how to provide, not because she wasn't enough, she was more than enough, but because some things required a particular shape, and she could not be every shape. She understood, also, that Woo Young's song had needed this too. Needed a reason to come back to the inside of himself after 14 years of exile from his own feeling. Needed, specifically, a 7-year-old who would say, "That sounds lonely," with no social filter and no mercy and total, devastating love. They had all three, somehow, needed each other. She went to the kitchen. She started making coffee. Nobody said anything. It was exactly enough. Marcus Devereaux's lawyer sent a letter in April. She had been half expecting it. She'd had 4 months since the phone call to prepare, and she'd done the things you do, consulted a legal aid organization, documented what she could, prepared Eli as much as you can prepare a 7-year-old for the idea that the law has opinions about his life. The letter was not unreasonable. Technically, it asked for mediated visitation. Nothing aggressive, nothing designed to take Eli away. Just presence, just access. She sat at her kitchen table that night. Her kitchen table, in the apartment in the Bronx that was hers, in the way things are yours when you've earned every inch of them, and read the letter 3 times. Her phone buzzed, a message from Woo Young. "Do you need to talk tonight?" She had told him about the lawyer. She had told him without planning to. In the way she'd started telling him things she hadn't planned to, because the planning had started to feel like the problem. She typed back, "I'm okay. I think..." He called her. She answered. "That's not a real answer." "I know." She almost laughed saying it. She knew he knew. She told him about the letter. He listened. When she finished, the line was quiet for a moment. "What does Eli want?" "I haven't asked him yet. I'm trying to figure out the right way to ask." "There might not be a right way. There might just be asking." She pressed her forehead to her hand. "He asked me once, last year, before all of this. He asked why his dad wasn't around, and I explained it, and he listened, and then said okay, and went back to his book. And I didn't know whether that was healthy, or whether he just packed it away somewhere. The way he does, the way I..." She stopped. "The way we do," Woo Young said quietly. "Yeah. He has somewhere to put things now. People to help him carry them. He didn't have that last year." She thought about the mat in the gym. She thought about, "That sounds lonely." She thought about the specific bravery of her child, who had walked into an unfamiliar man's space and asked to learn something and received more than he'd asked for in the way that the best gifts arrive, without announcement. "I know. You don't have to do this alone. I know that too." And she did. Not theoretically. Not hopefully. She knew it the way you know a thing when it's standing next to you with its hand held out. She talked to Eli the next day. She sat with him on the floor of his room, which was where the important conversations always happened, surrounded by his books and the sneakers that kept outgrowing themselves, and the particular clutter of a child who was making a home out of every surface he touched. She told him about the letter. She told him what it meant. She asked him what he thought. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "Is he a good person?" She thought about how to be honest without being unfair. "I don't know who he is now. He was someone I loved once, and then he made choices I couldn't make sense of. People can change. I don't know if he has. I don't have to decide right now. It wasn't a question. No, baby, you don't. And you'll be there when I do decide. Every single time. He nodded. He picked up his book. The conversation was over in the way children end conversations, completely, without ceremony, having gotten what they needed from it. She leaned against the wall in his room and thought, "We're going to be okay." Not because the hard things were over. They weren't. But because okay had stopped being about the absence of hard things and had become about the presence of people to move through them with. It was May, a bright, newly warm Saturday, the city finally convinced of spring, when Woo Young's song said something that changed the shape of things. The session had ended. Eli was on the mat doing a sequence he'd been practicing on his own between Saturdays, running it with the focused, slightly performative energy of someone who knows they're being watched and wants to demonstrate what they've learned. He didn't need guidance for it anymore. He was doing it on his own. Woo Young stood beside Savannah in the doorway, not opposite her, beside her. This had become normal. The architecture of their proximity had been slowly, quietly renegotiated over the months, until standing beside each other in a doorway felt like the right arrangement for two people who were figuring out something large together. "I want to tell you something." He was still watching Eli, not her. "Okay. I have spent most of my adult life measuring the value of things by what they produced, whether they were useful, profitable, strategic." A pause. I did not know how to value something just because it was good, because being near it made me a better version of myself than I would have been without it. She waited. He was still watching Eli on the mat. "I am telling you this because I need you to know that I understand what this is, what it means. I am not a man who says these things easily or without knowing what they cost. I want you to know that." "I know that." She did. He turned to look at her then. "What you've built, you and Eli, by yourself, with nothing given and everything earned. I have watched it for months, and I want you to know that I see it. That it is remarkable." A beat. "That you are." She had been braced for something. Some version of a declaration that she would have to receive and process, and carefully, calmly incorporate into the plan she was still half constructing in the back of her mind. What she hadn't been braced for was being seen. Specifically, completely, without agenda. Being told, "I see what you've done. I see who you are." Not as a prelude to something else, but as the thing itself. "And you're going to make me cry in your hallway." Something that might have been a smile moved across his face. She'd learned to see those. They were quiet, they were brief, and they were more honest than most people's loudest expressions. "That's allowed. Crying is allowed." "Did someone tell you that recently?" "Someone told me I sounded lonely. The rest I'm working out." She laughed, a little undone, the way laughter arrives at the edge of tears. She looked at Eli on the mat, who had finished his sequence and was now standing with his arms at his sides, looking satisfied, waiting to see if anyone had noticed. "We noticed," Woo Young called. Eli beamed. It was the same beam she'd known his whole life, the one that started in his whole face before it decided which part to settle in. It landed in his eyes. She looked at the man beside her. She thought, this is what I was protecting myself from. Not pain. This exact thing. The possibility of something real, with someone who meant it, in a life she could actually inhabit. "I'm glad Eli asked you." He turned back to watch his son, their son, in every way that mattered now. "So am I." Autumn again. October. 1 year from the morning everything began. Eli Cross was 8 now. Had turned 8 in August with a party that involved too much cake and a go-kart track in New Jersey. and absolutely no dignity from anyone involved. He had grown half an inch and gained 2 opinions on every subject, and could now execute 3 of the forms Woo Young had taught him with the confidence of someone who knows exactly how to stand in the world. He had met Marcus Devereaux twice, carefully, in a public space, with Savannah present, and nobody making promises they couldn't keep. It had been difficult and unsatisfying and true, in the way things are true when they're still being worked out. Eli had returned from both meetings quieter than usual, and had processed them in his room, and then come to find Savannah on the couch and crawled in beside her without saying anything. Which was enough. Which was more than enough. He still called Woo Young Mr. Woo Young, because Eli had a sense of ritual, and he'd started with that, and it had its own kind of meaning by now. Woo Young had long since stopped correcting it. Savannah had changed the terms of her employment, because clarity required naming what things were, which was harder than leaving them unnamed but considerably better in the long run. She worked 3 mornings a week at a cleaning company she'd joined the year before, and she was 3 months into a property management certification she'd enrolled in, partly because of a conversation with Woo Young about the specific kind of work that suited the way her mind moved. None of this had been planned. All of it had been possible. Woo Young had taken Eli to a taekwondo competition in Brooklyn in September, just to watch, to see what it looked like from outside the gym. Eli had come home with 17 opinions and one very firm plan. The plan involved competing by next spring. Savannah had said, "Let's see." Woo Young had said, to Eli, in the slightly conspiratorial way he developed for moments like this, "We'll work on it." She had stood in the kitchen watching the 2 of them at the table, heads bent over a competition schedule they'd printed out, and she had thought, "I almost didn't come back that second Saturday. I almost talked myself out of every single thing that followed. I was so certain that safety required distance. That love was a thing to be evaluated for risk before being felt." She had not been wrong. Exactly. Caution had kept her son safe when nothing else would. The rule had been built from genuine necessity, and she wouldn't dismantle it with hindsight. But rules are built for conditions. Conditions change. And the work, the actual work, the work nobody warns you about, is learning when to adapt the structure, and when the structure is just fear wearing a better name. October morning. The gym. 7 o'clock. Savannah was not in the hallway. She was on the mat, sitting cross-legged in the way Eli had taught her, watching her son take his position across from Woo Young. The room had the same light it had that first morning, east-facing, early, the city beginning its machinery somewhere below. Her son's sneakers were new. Woo Young's feet were bare, the way they always were in here. Eli said, with the confidence of someone who has been told something 17 times and finally understood it in his body. "Ready? Show me." And Eli Cross, 8 years old, raised by a woman who had rebuilt her life from materials that should not have been enough, trained by a man who had finally learned to let something in. Eli Cross stood the way he'd been taught to stand, breathed the way he'd been taught to breathe, and moved. Savannah watched from the mat. She had stopped holding her breath months ago. She had stopped counting exits and auditing gifts and waiting for the cost. She was just there, in the room. Part of it. Home is not always the place you were born into. Sometimes it's the place you find by accident, on a Tuesday morning in October, because you came in early and your son forgot to stay in the doorway. Sometimes it is built slowly, on Saturday mornings, in a gym full of light. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a man who places a chair in a hallway without explaining why, and a boy who asks without hesitation, and a woman who finally decides to stay. If this story moved you, subscribe and leave a comment. Tell me which moment hit hardest.